Hi everyone, today we'll be learning about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Before we start, let's look at the general structure of a flower. Flower is the reproductive organ of the flowering plant. Flowers can be unisexual, means having only male or female parts, or bisexual, having both types of parts. Here I'm showing you a flower that is bisexual. Each part of the flower serves a certain function. So let's start with petals. Petals are usually big and brightly colored. This is to attract insects or birds for pollination. Sepal is to protect the flower while it is still in bud. And this whole thing is the female reproductive structure known as carpel. Pollination simply means the transferring of the pollen grain from other flowers or its own flower to the stigma. The second part is known as style. Style joins the stigma to the ovary. Stigma is where the pollen tube will grow after pollination. The third part is known as ovary. Ovary contains one or more ovules. This is where the female gamete will develop. So remember, carpel consists of three parts: the stigma, style, and ovary. Now let's have a look at the male reproductive part, which is known as stamen. Remember, stamen is the male reproductive structure. Stamen consists of two parts, which are the anther and filament. So the tip of the male reproductive part is the anther, which is like a house of pollen. Anther produces pollen, and male gametes are found in pollen grains. Filament is the part that supports the anther. So remember, stamen is the male reproductive part, while carpels is the female reproductive structure. Now, let's have a look at the process of pollination and fertilization. In order to be pollinated, pollen must be moved from a stamen to the stigma. Before we start talking about pollination, please note that there are 8 nuclei in the embryo sacs of carpel. The 3 cells at the end of the embryo sac are known as antipodal cells. The 2 cells in the middle are pollen nuclei. At the opening of the embryo sac, there are 2 synergid cells and 1 egg cell. The nuclei that is important in fertilization are the 2 pollen nuclei and the egg nucleus. We will talk about that later. Now, Let's look at the first step of the reproduction of flowering plant, which is pollination. In order to be pollinated, a pollen must be moved from a stamen to the stigma. When pollen from the plant stamen is transferred to the stigma of the same plant, it is called self-pollination. When pollen from the stamen is transferred to a different plant's stigma, it is called cross-pollination. Once the pollen grain arrive at the stigma of a flower, pollen grain will germinate. The stigma will secrete a sugary solution which will stimulate germination. When pollen grain germinates, it produces a pollen tube, and this will be the second step. This pollen tube will grow through the style into the ovule. During the growth of the pollen tube, the generative nucleus, which is the male nucleus, will divide by mitosis to form two male nuclei. So remember, this step is important. Two male nuclei are being formed. So the pollen tube will grow towards the ovule, and once it penetrates the ovule, the tube nucleus will disintegrate. The two male nuclei will enter the embryo sac. One male nucleus will fuse with the polar nuclei to form a triploid zygote, while another male nucleus will fuse with the egg nucleus to form a diploid zygote. And this process is known as double fertilization because there's a union of two male nuclei with different nuclei of the embryo sac. So remember, triploid zygote is formed from fusion of one male nucleus with two polar nuclei. While the diploid zygote is formed from fusion of one male gamete with one egg cell. The triploid zygote will eventually develop into endosperm. Endosperm provides nutrients to the growing embryo. The diploid zygote will multiply by mitosis to form embryo. The ovule will become seed. The outer integument of ovule will become seed coat or testa. The rest of the ovary will become a fruit. Now let's recap the core process that happened here, which is the fusion of two male nuclei with different nuclei in the embryo sac to form a triploid zygote and a diploid zygote. And this process is known as double fertilization. So please remember, the keyword is double fertilization. That's all for today's video. Thank you.